So go ahead. Okay. So hi, I'm here to talk to you about methods of instructional resource efficacy computation. I'm going to talk a little bit about specific ways of defining efficacy and measuring it, but I'm actually more interested in talking about, given that you're interested in efficacy, how you can actually start doing it, and more about measuring efficacy across systems, between applications and between organizations, which is something that I've noticed that isn't really done today, and I think people are missing out on a lot of insights that they could garner from having more than one silo of information. So with that, let's talk about this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about basic efficacy. So just by way of background, we started OpenEd. I work for ACT, which purchased OpenEd about 2.5 years ago, and we've been going for about 6.5 years. We have roughly 1 million videos out there, all aligned to a set of skills. And since we started, the sort of purpose of OpenEd, the reason why we started it, even though there's lots of lures, was to do alignment to learning goals and measurement of efficacy. So that's always been what we've done. We're really an alignment and efficacy engine. So with that, we'll talk about the basic efficacy measurement that we've had in place for years. Those of you that are learning scientists will probably sort of scoff because it's very simple by design, very much white box and transparent to the teacher. Then I'll talk about like how did we glue together this efficacy information? How did we get information from assessment systems that are separate from where the videos run and sort of glue it together and figure out what the efficacy really is? And then we'll talk about some early work on machine learning models to treat it as a prediction problem. So how do we compute efficacy? As mentioned, we're this OpenEd, it's really not about our specific videos. To be honest, we probably have all the same videos that just about every lure has. Our thing is like, let's try to figure out what they're aligned to through machine learning, which is not the subject of this talk, and how to compute efficacy towards those goals. We use assessments to choose the instructional videos. And then we also, of course, when they've done the video, we suggest an assessment to prove their knowledge. And it turns out, to our shock, 70% of students opt to take the suggested video, which we didn't expect. We expected some, or we would never get efficacy. But we didn't expect quite as many. And of course, we show the videos, when you do the pre-assessment, we show the videos in order of efficacy. So what is that efficacy? Interestingly enough, when we first started, we thought we had really interesting ideas. I had a bunch of education people working for me that were our curators or subject matter experts, and we tried very complex learning models, and teachers hated it because we showed the efficacy. We didn't just use it as a black box learning algorithm. Maybe we should have in hindsight, but they said, oh, it's this efficacy. Where did you get that? So we had to dumb everything down and say it's the average of subsequent assessments. And I'm not particularly interested in engaging, like, we'll talk about what we think is sort of the most advanced way of doing it, but I'll just say that this average of subsequent assessments is very much by design, and it was to get teacher buy-in. The assessments are short 5 to 7 item classroom assessments. Of course, anybody who's a psychometrician, when I joined ACT, of course, like Alina's whole team said, what are you talking about? You can't learn anything from 5 to 7 item assessments. And it is what it is. As those of you that are in K-12 know, that's the dominant culture. That's what you get for a classroom test is a 5 to 7 item assessments. We actually have 20 item assessments that you can garner way more insights from, and there's very little usage of them. We actually call them homeworks. They're used for a different thing, but you don't get a lot of usage. The skills are based on ACT's holistic framework, which is an amazing thing. It's actually Creative Commons licensed. Anybody can use it without paying for it. I was talking to the guys from Berkeley about hey, it'd be interesting to look at your unpacking of next generation science, compare it with frameworks.act.org and do a pull request. Because I'm sure, I think there's probably some really good stuff there. I'm very impressed by what they did. But that's where we got the skills. Before we joined ACT, we had our own unpacking. It's called Open Learning Objectives. We built with a company, nonprofit called the Learning Accelerator. ACT's holistic framework is way better than what we did. So this is just a graphic view. What do we mean by efficacy computation? So assuming that you have these videos, they're on the same skill, you have a student, he takes an assessment, watches video 1, takes an assessment, gets a 90. Student B watches video 2, takes an assessment again on the same skill, call it skill 1. These events get sent to the learning record store in Caliper. This is an open source project, a little toy learning record store we wrote called Callisto. Based on all these events going to the learning record store, we then have a resource efficacy rater script that grabs all the media events and the outcome events, actually now called grade events in the latest version of Caliper, and then we compute the computed efficacy and we store it into the learning object repository. So why use Caliper for integration? And interestingly enough, it's very rare that people are using Caliper. It's sort of frustrating because I participate in that committee for IMS and we do a lot of work on this. So why would we use it? Interestingly enough, the UC Berkeley Amplify Science stuff is using Caliper, I'm told, which is awesome. It was awesome to hear. It'd be great to see them use that to sort of go across system boundaries. That might solve that problem of like, you know, inevitably your remediation resources get more and more about like passing the item, which is the same problem that Dreambox had, and it's the same problem that there's a really cool European app called Century Learning, and it's funny, you have these like curated sandbox videos and then they start off really good and they're general and they become about passing the item. So this is a way to sort of get around that problem. If you can have Caliper instrumenting events across systems, then you can have the assessment really have nothing to do with the instructional thing. So Caliper is very specific about the real world events you care about, like those assessment events, and assessment item event, and media event. And XAPI is not. This is not a hate on XAPI thing. XAPI is really more a style of representing events, very much driven from philosophy, right? Like these statements in RDF, like, you know, have subject, verbs, actors. Caliper didn't start out that way, interestingly enough. They didn't have this like fundamental RDF philosophy. They moved to it. But the interesting thing that Caliper always had was like, hey, let's talk about what really matters. What do we really care about as far as learning events? And it puts a stake in the ground. So I strongly encourage those of you building systems, especially those of you that think, hey, to really measure efficacy, I need to get out of my little sandbox and go somewhere else to measure efficacy, to consider implementing Caliper. The other thing is some people might say, oh, I get results from LTI. It's not going to work. That's not just like this like you run off to some other tool, you get something, you get like a number. You're not going to garner big insights from that. So you really want Caliper to get this rich sort of clickstream analysis of what people are doing across system boundaries. There is sort of a problem with this. I'm not going to go into too much length because I think I'm mostly selling you guys Caliper. I don't know why I don't get royalties from IMS or anything. But one of the big issues is that Caliper does not define how to query this stuff. So there's this interesting thing. It seems to me that in the ed tech world, people have finally come around to saying, oh yeah, I better pre-instrument the events. This is huge progress, right? And we're finally at this moment in time where nobody ever did this. And they always said, oh, wait, I really wanted to know this, but now I have 6 years of usage and I don't know anything. I think we're there now. It appears that we're there. People know they need to do the instrumentation. What people don't do a priori is say, what are the questions that I'm going to answer from these events? And so what I would say, and maybe I can get some philosophical backing for this statement, is it's actually even more important to think about, I'm going to instrument all these events. I better think ahead of time what questions I really want to answer. And that's almost never done. Almost never. Like nobody does it. And so what kinds of pathologies does that introduce if you don't think about the questions that you want to answer? I'm showing here an example of how you would populate things to Callisto. And then we're seeing Callisto actually puts a stake in the ground of the kind of questions that you could answer. So the difference from other learning record stores that are out there, it's open source at that project, is it actually says, I might want to say, what did this student do over time? Or what are the things that people did before taking an assessment item? These are like very much like I want to get these insights, so I want to ask these questions. Now, just to make it grounded into something really specific about what this causes you to do is, if you didn't say, so this is a media event. It basically says that somebody watched a video at a certain time. And most of it's pretty uncontroversial, right? This is that whole RDF thing. There's an ID, right? This is the person. It's of this type. And then the action, that's the actor. This is how we describe the person. This is the action. Oh, he ended the video, and the object is the video, right? So these RDF triples. Somebody did a certain thing on a certain thing. But there's all this other gunk. Like the learning objectives that this video is about. This actually says, this is a pointer using another standard called case that says, what the heck is this video trying to teach? Any guesses, especially for those of you that have instrumented caliper, like, why would we do this? Can't we just look this up? Can't we just, look this up and say, go to some lore and say, what are the learning objectives like OpenEd or Novation or Guru or whatever, or Khan, and say, what are the learning objectives this is about? Why are we denormalizing this and throwing all this extra data in there?
More than one learning objective per video?
Well, there certainly could be more than one. In this example, I only have one. The reason is, you could look at this as like, that's totally inefficient. Why would you ever do that? It turns out to answer these questions in a practical way in any kind of deployed system, you better denormalize the heck out of it, or you'll never be able to answer any of these questions. You'll be writing code that goes through the learning record store one item at a time and doing lookups, and you'll never get any questions answered. Now, you can't just say I denormalize every possible thing because it's a web of chains, right? Then I have to go from the learning objective and see what things that's related to. So you can't denormalize arbitrarily, but you have to think about what questions that you want to answer beforehand, or you'll never denormalize the right data. And Alina and I were talking about this at dinner last night. Is this a better explanation?
I think you still need a hybrid, because you may think you came up with all the questions that you will want to have answered. But then, after you actually collected the data, you would say, oh, wait a second, maybe I can still find X. So you need to find a way to allow for that.
Yeah, and I certainly agree that after the fact, you need the ability to, oh, I forgot something. Now I want to go look at the other learning objective that this is related to. And I didn't want to shut that off. What I'm saying, what I've seen as a practical matter from my own experience, all the mistakes I made, and from EdTech colleagues, is that trying to garner insights is if you aren't doing some denormalization around the really important questions, they never get answered. And I believe today, it's sort of a side effect of everybody doing Agile. Agile means like, just go capture some stuff and we'll figure it out later. This is one example where Agile, you can go too far with Agile. You really need to step back and reflect and think about what are the kinds of insights I want to get. Same thing with grade event. You can see we send it and we have all of this denormalized data of like including information about like what happened, in what context was this assigned, when was it assigned. So there's, the core of it is this actor, the grading thing, graded, the assessment, but there's all kinds of extra stuff that is in there to anticipate the analysis that we want to do. So this is the pseudocode for the resource efficacy computation. I put it as pseudocode because the code that we have, we actually open source it because it's simple. There's no IP here. I've actually gotten challenged on this by our colleagues, Alina, and I've said, no. The basic efficacy, there's no IP. It's like purposely no IP. So this is the pseudocode to do that computation. Write to me if you want the actual code is in Go, just so it can be fast. Write to me if you want the link, but it's up on the OpenEd GitHub repo. And if you like programming in Go, feel free to use it. It's open source. Now, by the way, that data set is the data set from the contextual efficacy. So I'm sorry, the full data set is 6 million assessments over 6 years. Those data set sizes have to do with the contextual efficacy. What I will say is on the basic efficacy alone, we're getting 0.76 R squared. But the important thing is, which is, pleasantly good, but I'll tell you about this new machine learning approach that we're very excited about. The important thing, though, is what are we using these efficacy scores for? It's for relative ordering of the resources. So the important thing is it better be right. You better not give a recommendation to a student of a bad resource. And that's the part that it's very effective for. But we still want to get it better. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here. I've got a paper out there that was actually written up in the Getting Smart blog about some of the insights we got. Is an amazing spread of efficacy ratings. We've learned things like shorter is better no matter how short. It's actually a chi-squared distribution, so really short videos. And that's why I'm excited about Alina, Saad, Yuchi, and Lou's work on splitting things, because shorter is better. And really short is even better. Different video types are very effective. I will say that the sort of blackboard scribbly thing are notably ineffective. And in particular, that particular publisher has fairly low efficacy, although he does occasionally get among his thousands of videos, he does occasionally get an effective one. Futures in resource efficacy computation. So there's lots of research in this area, like how you can get better efficacy. So I talked with Yigal about incorporating log level learning decay. There's efficacy for learning levels. There's ensuring a pretest, although it's very hard to enforce that. The one that we are doing right away is this ability to sort of curve it up. So when a teacher sees 70% efficacy on certain things, that's really good because it's a really hard learning goal. So we're normalizing all those. That'll be on Academy very soon. That's why I've got it bolded in blue. But what we really want to do is step back and say, hey, all these things about like, what we want to do is do a more robust prediction. Instead of saying, let's do it based upon learning levels, let's take everything we know about the student. Demographic, things, we know where they took it. What are the things about that demographic area in terms of income and population density? What are the things that we know about the actual event? So what we do is we've got to this more robust model. Everything in blue is your core things that we know about the resource, the duration, the subject, the text complexity, the grade resource, and the previously computed basic efficacy. And of course, we were using all of these to do the basic efficacy. Everything in purple is about the event. Did they complete it? How many times did they watch it? What was the local hour? We actually have local day of the week, which is not showing there. This is an older slide. And then everything in red is everything we know about the area. So their historical quiz score in that area, are they a good math learner? They've taken lots of assessments. Do they tend to do well? The grade the student is in, the median income of the area. This is actually highly predictive. And again, this is an old slide. We also have actually I have in the future the density of the area, but that's also looking like it's quite predictive. So this has a more restricted number of events because we want to make sure everything's filled in. But we are getting amazing results. We're getting an R-squared of 0.88. Those are all the hyperparameters. It's super learner algorithm regressor. We're using an AutoML tool called AutoSKLearn to try everything. And we're getting really good results, but we're going to be improving it. So we can get more subjects filled in with this skill to subject mapping. We acquired this company called Novation that has this very detailed subject ontology. And so we're going to use that to get more subjects filled in that are more specific. And we can get the subject filled in because we know the skill that's on it. More complete data by using lat long instead of just city and zip. We do have 25% missing income estimates. More features such as population density, month of the school year. Everything in bold we think we'll have done this month. And we'll have a much more accurate model. And at that point, we will publish in some appropriate thing, probably eLearn. So where would you use this? You'd use it from any place. So Academy will be using it. We also have a free API that we've given out for doing resource search, where you search for resources by different skills. And there's a standard for that API. We're going to offer this also as an, so if you have a tool and you say, I'm willing to give you these sort of contextual information about the students, again, not PII, but things like, their zip code and those other attributes, we will give you back including a search for resources like what skill you want it for. We will give you back a list of resources with basic efficacy, like not knowing student context, but also this contextual efficacy. That's it. I'll pause for questions or stop for questions. Yes.
If you had a magic wand and could change anything, what would help you most in advancing this work?
Huh. Oh, okay. So huge thing is, I mean, you heard me talk about crossing system boundaries so you don't get this fox watching the chickens thing to measure efficacy. Now we are crossing system boundaries. So this caliper thing was real. We actually use a third-party assessment runner called Tau, which we instrumented with caliper, and we're using that data combined with the data that we put in to cross the system boundaries and then do the analysis. What I'm dying for, but it's really hard to get, even though we're working with all these developers, giving them like our free APIs, what I'm dying for is, you did your stuff on OpenEd or Academy, right? And now they go somewhere else. And those cross boundaries are real, right? Because a lot of times people are coming to us. We actually get more usage through our APIs than people going directly to our websites. But we have not yet found anyone that's willing to say, I'm going to take, even with this anonymous student ID token, which we make them give to us in the API because we expected we would want to get this. So far, we've not gotten anybody that's willing to send to an LRS, our LRS, their LRS, whatever, those, different assessments, their own intermediate assessments. And I think that would be the most powerful thing, because I would say the Achilles heel of this is, one, the assessments are short. I admit that. And it feels like you don't have that. There is still a little bit too much of the fox watching the chickens, because even though it's like a third-party video and it's a third-party assessment, just the fact that we're offering it in one place makes me, I guess, queasy. I would feel much better if, it was hooked up to, somebody else's at least interim assessment. Yes?
Are you doing a lot of grouping of the different events? And the reason for the question is that I assume that some of the events are signifying what activities are actually performed.
Yeah, so that media event, by the way, is like the kid watched a video. So that's an example.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure what you mean by grouping.
Yeah, there could be multiple different events which signify that they actually not only looked upon that particular video, but also had a particular other purpose which could be identified by the events. And therefore you can collect more events in order to have a richer set of data which actually do analysis on that particular activity. So
maybe say things like, all these events co-occurred in time and location or something, so I can garner further insights?
In the context or a location or a
Yeah.
time span?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great idea, and my hope is that, I'm the first to admit there's probably lots of insights that you can garner. We're garnering it pretty much just to do efficacy analysis, but the exciting thing is, for our purposes, the exciting thing is once you have these shared repositories, people can garner all kinds of other insights. We have shared, now that we're part of ACT, we have shared up our repository of media events and assessment events. So at this point, I can't even say that I personally know everything. I'm sure Alina has some people chewing on that repository events, and we have another area, research area within ACT that is probably doing things. I don't know what those things are. I think now that you've suggested it, it's likely Alina has already told some other researcher to figure that out.
We found in different kind of environment that event aggregation is actually allowing you to do much more insight into what is actually happening.
Right. No, I like that example because it ties back to this whole thing is, if you can think about the question you want to answer beforehand, it can make it, you can do the denormalization to put extra information in there to not make it quite so painful to do the aggregation you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the other questions that evidence-centered design makes you answer, Ryan, is not just what data you think you need, but why you think it's good data to answer the question that you have. What is the warrant for that data to support your claim, right? So that's another piece that you can think about in the aggregation might be that it's more explanatory, right? Because there's temporal patterns there that need to be taken into account. But that second question, even though we're still trying to get people to ask the first one, what should I think about before I even instrument my environment? But why is that good data? Not just because
No, I
we
like
have
that.
it.
Yeah, and it's another, you're creating this critical mass of questions you have to answer a priori,
Yeah,
which is,
there's a lot of thinking about that.
I really agree with, which is this idea that this is like, it's sort of like the anti-agile. In this area, you shouldn't be agile. You should spend time thinking about what you want to answer, and are these things, to your point, are the events that I'm capturing really going to answer this question?
I wouldn't say it's anti-agile because that's going to flip people out a little bit. Like you can still do that in an agile and iterative fashion. In fact, that's probably the best way to do it, is to check whether that data are really explaining what you think it explains. So.
Maybe two more questions?
Yeah.
Are you asking for questions?
I think she's...
Oh, we have time for two more? Otherwise, we can get some coffee and dessert.
Okay.
We're just,
Cool. I'm competing with dessert.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much.